Hello and welcome to Breaking Ground on iPropertyRadio with myself, Carol Tallon, the show where we chat to industry experts to get a view on what's happening on the ground and to learn about new trends emerging within the construction industry. This show is brought to you in partnership with Place Engage, a data-driven platform for more successful public consultation and community engagement for your next development project. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Rob Fox, CEO of Suppo. Rob, you're very welcome. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, hi Carol, great to see you too.
Rob, most people will be familiar with you from Site Passport. Suppo is a lovely, shiny, very well executed new brand. Talk to us about the rebrand from Site Passport to Suppo.
Yes, we had a rebrand in September, and it's gone extremely well. I suppose we just wanted to freshen up the brand. We've been in business for about 6 years, and based on our feedback and the type of work that we're doing with our customers and how we've evolved over the past 6 years, we felt it was time for a rebrand. And I suppose the name Suppo speaks probably more accurately to what we do and the value that we provide. And also, I suppose it was timely that we have just recently launched into the UK market. So we felt it was a good time to launch the brand, and it's been well received, which is great.
Very good. And look, you're absolutely right. Suppo is a really good term because obviously your focus is on helping the construction industry to expand and improve relationships and really solidify their supply chain. So you might just talk to us, maybe start from the beginning for anybody who's not familiar with the offering. Because we have seen post-COVID that there's been a huge uptake in construction technologies, but construction companies can still be confused and project owners can still be confused about how all of these different technologies integrate and play well together. So you might just take us through from the initial offering how Suppo works.
Yeah, and that's interesting. It's a very good point, Carol, in relation to the confusion around, how different technologies perform and how they integrate. And construction is a very, very busy industry, and people trying to get the headspace to look at their existing technology stack, if you want to call it that, and to consider what else improvements they might bring or what else they might bring in. It's very, very difficult. So we actually spend a lot of time working with our customers, helping them understand their own technology stack, and then helping them understand where Suppo fits into that stack. And we talk about the trends, I suppose, in construction technology. That's also interesting because naturally enough, the focus in construction is actually on site. It's actually on the building piece. And there's lots of software out there, and a lot of companies have adopted technologies to help them manage, the performance on site and the actual projects. I suppose what we're seeing now is that a lot of companies have got that figured out, and now they're actually looking to say, okay, well, what can we do in the pre-construction space that actually will help improve how we perform on site? So that's where we come in. We're very much in the pre-construction space, and we're very much about helping companies understand, I suppose, the who's who of supply chain in the market, who are all the subcontractors out there they could be working with that they're not working with, that might actually be a very good fit for them as a company and a very good fit for their projects. And it's building relationships, as you said, with those companies, getting to know them, getting to understand them, and but also understanding specifically what their capabilities are and what their capacity is. So, because at the end of the day, it's a matching exercise, and as I said, construction is highly competitive. The margins are thin, the risks are high. So choosing your right subcontractors and the right supply chain partners can be the difference between success and failure. So that's what we do. We ultimately help main contractors and property developers to find the best subcontractors out there that are best suited to them, that are best suited to their projects, and we'll give them that critical balance between price and performance, because it can't be all about price. Subcontractors have to be able to do the job, capable of doing the job and perform. So it's this balance between price and performance.
I think that balance between price and performance should be pushing an open door to the industry that's been pushing for the same on tenders. This is something that the industry itself has been arguing for in relation to its own winning tenders itself. So actually, that's almost given. And I want to return to talk about supply chain because obviously that's such a huge issue today. But just because I know there will be people listening in that might be struck, and I want to use the opportunity there. You mentioned that when you're speaking to potential new customers for the first time, you take the opportunity to help kind of walk them through their technology stack and where Suppo fits into that. this is something that I'm genuinely curious about, because there's a widening gap between the best in class in terms of contractors who are the best in class and those that are really lagging behind. So talk to me about what a best in class technology stack looks like for project owners today.
Yeah, and that's a really good question. And I suppose, I mean, the technology is just reflecting the existing process in construction. Like, no technology company is reinventing the wheel. They're just trying to provide a better technology solution that streamlines and improves the process. So when we look at technology stacks with companies, we have a template that we lay out for them, which essentially starts at the design, bidding, procurement, tender handover, and the construction phase, and all the different elements of construction around health and safety and quality. So we lay out a template, and then what we help them do is we help them overlay and say, well, at the moment, how do you do those different pieces? And some of it is a software that they might have been using for years. They may or may not be happy with it, but they use it. And some of it might just be internal processes. It might be email and Excel or the solution for that. And and that's very quickly and very easily sets out for main contractors what their technology stack is in a context that makes sense to them. And then after that, I suppose we explain to them we've no problem talking about other vendors, because this is a we have to understand who's out in the market for, so we can explain to main contractors where we fit, and because that's one of the biggest challenges, where does supply will fit. So we would say to us across these different um, phases of construction and stages of construction, there are various technology you could use. So whether it's estimating software, whether it's site management software, and we look at where their gaps are, and they say, okay, well, we have a system we're very happy with that does that. We have a system that we're not really happy with that does this, and we will give them potentially suggestions around what we hear back from the market about what works for different companies. So that's a very simple way, but a very effective way for people to get their head around, have all this technology. And the interesting thing, Carol, I suppose, is that there's been this evolution of software over the last, 10, 15 years, maybe in construction, where 10 or 15 years ago, people were buying apps for everything. It was like, I want an app for this. And we've talked to construction companies who said at one point they had 50 or 60 applications being used in their company. And what we've seen then is then the next phase was, well, actually, we want a system that does everything. So lots of companies out there with the best of intentions said we can provide you a one-stop shop, best in class, we can do everything. So people got on board with those platforms. And those platforms are very good. But what the feedback we got is that, and we continuously get, is those companies usually start with a core offering. And that's the bit that's really, really good and works really, really well. When they start to build too much around that, it starts to get a little bit fuzzy and it doesn't work as well. It looks good. And people often say to us, we get sold the dream, and then the dream is not a reality. So now that the third sort of evolution of that is people are saying, okay, I don't need 50 pieces of software. One isn't going to do it. And probably the right balance is for most companies is somewhere between 8 and 12 pieces of technology.
8 to 12 seems like a high number. So this is where the integration piece becomes key. And I know that's a shift I've really seen with innovators and prop tech and construction technology founders over the last number of years, that they're coming to the conclusion that actually, despite the rhetoric, despite the sales pitch, there is no one technology does all. And if you continue to sell that, I think you lose credibility in the marketplace, where it's actually what you need to be selling is your ability to integrate with the technologies that have already been invested in and that are trusted. So essentially that means, so you're right, companies don't want to use a high number of different applications, but they do want to be able to centralize things in maybe a cloud-based dashboard, and integration where your stats can show up, and that is a really big part. And I think maybe that's the challenge that's still coming down the track. We're seeing integrations can happen, but maybe the reporting functions aren't coming together in one dashboard. And I think that's possibly where we're aiming for over the next kind of 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, no, agreed. And every time we talk to customers, integrations is obviously a key focus. But a lot of companies are still at the stage where they're actually trying to understand which individual technologies do the job well that needs to be done, whether it's estimating, whether it's procurement, whether it's site management, whatever it is. And what we normally say to companies is, yes, the integration is important, But don't get too hung up on the integration. What you do need to know is that if you are buying an existing software or a new software, or you're going to keep an existing software, that you know that at the right time in the future, that those systems will be able to talk to each other. But if you start with the integration and try and work it, people just, their heads get fried. So it's just that the capacity is there to integrate and then make sure you're using the right solution. So that's what we normally say to our customers. Now, some of our customers are very sophisticated and are obviously using Power BI, and they want everything to be bubbled up and into the Power BI to get this full dashboard. And some companies are doing that very, very successfully, but that's still quite a small number of companies are at that level.
You know, and I think this comes back to our earlier point there about this gap widening between those best in class, those that are doing it very well, and maybe the laggards that will find it increasingly difficult to bridge that gap. You know, one thing I'm very conscious of, and particularly through the show, but actually across the day job as well, we've a huge focus on construction technologies, and we're also very deeply involved in communicating the message that modern construction is so much more than boots on the ground. You know, we like to talk about the offsite and other modern methods of construction. We'd like to talk about the different business functions that wrap around the delivery of construction services. But at the end of the day, this is still very much dependent on humans on the ground doing stuff. And I think there was a very good hoarding put up on a building site that was shared virally online. And the hoarding around the building site just had the text, ChatGPT, build me a building. And obviously, you know, we can talk about the technology as much as we like, but we still are dependent on humans on the ground. And I think this is where the supply chain really emerges as, you know, the potential to be the strongest or the weakest link for a construction, for a contemporary contractor. So almost not even stepping away from the technology, but even from the human side of supply chain management, there's still a human dynamic at play here. How can technology help a contractor to expand their supply chain, whether it's because they're winning new projects in new regions and they need to expand in existing regions, or actually develop a whole new supply chain in a region where they don't have the trust and the credibility and the reputation built up?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. So I suppose if you take, as I might have said earlier on, that 80% of the value of a construction project in supply chain. So whether you're sticking to your knitting and doing, you know, working in the same sectors in the same regions, you always need a good, solid, reliable supply chain to help you do that work. And you need to bring in fresh blood into that at times, naturally. You know, construction is very competitive. You know, so that's, you've always got to keep the supply chain fresh. Particularly though, a lot of the companies we work with are going into new regions, and particularly obviously there's a lot of main contractors who are moving over more towards housing schemes and residential developments that might not have been their bread and butter before. And that's a whole new supply chain. So whether you're just trying to, you know, have better diversification and resilience in your existing supply chain across your existing contractors, or you need a whole new supply chain, essentially a new region or a new sector, as you said, Carol, it amounts to the same thing. I suppose it's all about information and relationships. So our starting point is who's out there that works in that region, that works in that sector, that you need more subcontractors from, or you just want to build out your supply chain a little bit more. And then after that, it's getting to know those companies. It's starting to build that relationship. So we work with companies to help them reach out to the supply chain, you know, across those various sectors and regions, and to start to invite them in. And it's a much more strategic approach to building supply chain. So traditionally, main contractors would have expected the subcontractors to turn up, knock on the door, and say, "Gives a job." That table has turned and has been turning for a long time, and the smarter contractors out there are realizing, you know what, we actually need to go on a marketing campaign here, essentially. And talk of marketing the supply chain is not something that main contractors typically think of. They very much market to their customers, which most people do, and to the architects who might be influential in giving them work. But now we see a lot of the companies we work with recognize I have to market and embrace my supply chain and build relationships, but that has to be authentic and it has to be real. And I can't just keep using up supply chain. So that's what we help them is identify who's out there, help them identify who is more suited to them, and then build those relationships through the platform. And then also then it gets into, I suppose, a level of data analytics when you talk about, the technology piece. Really, after you've built the relationship, the knowledge and the relationship of the market, then you're really trying to understand of all these companies we could be working with, which ones are most suited to this sector, for this client, in this region, for this type of job. And every job is different from the last one. So what we help contractors do is gather all of the data that they need to essentially be able to say, there's 100 electrical contractors that could, on the surface, do this job, but who are the 5 or 6 or 7 that are most suited to this job? And that becomes essentially a question of having enough data. That data needs to be accurate and up to date, and you have to be able to analyze that data in a way that's, very simple and very straightforward. It gives you a simple answer is, as I say, out of 50, here's the 5 who are best suited to this particular project.
Rob, you mentioned there that Suppo, while 6 years in business, albeit under the other brand, has in the last year expanded into the UK market. We hear quite regularly on the show that the supply chain across the UK is a more mature supply chain. It is a better resourced supply chain. So it is easier for Irish companies expanding into the UK market to tap into a really well-developed supply chain, much more so than they can if they were moving from, say, Dublin down to Cork. So what differences are you experiencing in terms of the supply chain offering in the UK versus Ireland?
Yeah, it is true that the supply chain in the UK is probably just a little bit, a couple of steps ahead, but not massively either, though, Carol. At the end of the day, it's a bit like the hoarding, the chat GPT. People have to turn up on site. Humans have to turn up on site, do the physical work. So it comes down to the quality of those people and the companies. And they can have all the systems in place and everything else, and they can be geared up, but it comes down to the people. But I suppose, one of the differences, I suppose, maybe is that the supply chain in the UK is slightly less fragmented, and the companies are slightly bigger and have slightly better profile and visibility. And in Ireland, there's still a lot of companies that are very much subcontract suppliers, are very much under the radar, particularly in the regions that might have a very little or no profile, online profile at all. So trying to unearth those companies initially can be quite difficult for companies, for contractors. So that's what we do, and that's why you are asked to do these your marketing piece to try and open up the doors and let people know that whoever's in town. But really, it boils down to, you know, it's a matching exercise. So it doesn't really matter to some degree how sophisticated the contractors are. You know, construction is such a broad church. Like even the biggest contractors in Ireland and in the UK do jobs from €1 million up to maybe €100 million, and it's horses for courses. So you need a particular caliber of contractor for the 100 million job. You need a different type of caliber for the 1 million job. That 1 million job might be a pharmaceutical job. So that's it. Just because it's small doesn't mean you don't need very highly specialized contractors. So that's what we come back. It's all about the information. It's all about the data. How do I know who's out there? How do I get enough information about these companies to be able to make better decisions around who I should be even talking to about the job? Never mind giving the job. Who am I going to get to price this job? So, you know yourself that one of the most precarious times for a main contractor or even a property developer is when they're bidding for the work or they're trying to work on the feasibility. If I go ahead with this job, am I going to make any money on it? And essentially, because of the 80% factor, that 80% of the value is the subcontractors, essentially the main contractors developers are relying on those subcontractors and suppliers to tell them what the price of something is on a given day. You have to ask the right subcontractors that question, because one subcontractor could say that'll probably cost about 200 grand. Somebody else might say it's 150. Somebody else might say it's 300 grand. And unless you know which of those companies has the experience and the capability of giving you the right price and a reliable price, you're kind of putting your finger in the air sometimes. And sometimes main contractors miss out on a job because they've taken a price that's too high from the wrong subcontractor. Sometimes they win a job and they're taking the price from the subcontractor is too low and they find they have a hole in their bid. So we're very much about, make sure the starting point with anything in estimated procurement is get the right prices from the right subcontractors. That's a good starting point.
Well, let's take maybe even a broader look at bid management right now, because I think that's something that is shifting quickly. And there's I think it's something that companies thought they had streamlined very well because they were doing very successfully. They tended to fall into their niche and keep winning the ones they expected to win. And it became, I don't want to say routine, but there was a certain amount of predictability around bids up until maybe the last 18 months. And we're seeing a shift now. So can you talk to us about some of the trends you're seeing in bid management at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, there are changes, all right, and obviously, given the issues with COVID and with Ukraine and all the other conflicts in the world and all the other challenges in the world, it has a massive impact on supply chain and the volatility of prices. So the price you give somebody today could change tomorrow. So that's still the biggest issue. But you're still relying on the supply chain who have the finger on the pulse to be able to give you those prices. I suppose probably one of the biggest shifts, and it hasn't really come about yet, but it's coming very, very quickly, is around ESG.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody talks about ESG, and people are really struggling to get their head around what does that mean. But in the context of your question, Carol, when companies at the moment price work, they have to give a certain amount of information to say, yes, we do certain things around ESG, and we will endeavor to make sure we can do all of these things around ESG. And that's those lists of questions are getting bigger and bigger and getting harder and harder to answer. The challenge for estimating particularly is that jobs now in the future and when the CSSRD comes in, the regulations governing ESG essentially it come into place next year. All of those questions are going to have to be answered at the estimating stage. So everything is going to nearly have to be agreed exactly what products have been used, nearly exactly what subcontractors have been used. It's all going to be front loaded. So there's going to be a whole lot more work that has to be done at the estimating stage because a project won't be able to be awarded unless all of the ESG information is satisfied or the questions are satisfied at the bid stage. You can't award a job and say, listen, lads, we hope now that you can meet the ESG criteria if you win this job. They have to be able to prove that they're going to be able to meet the ESG criteria when they're bidding for the job. So the ESG piece is going to become a much bigger factor for estimating and bid management.
I would very firmly hold the view that the companies I'm talking to today confuse or conflate ESG with sustainability, and certainly environmental concerns are a part of ESG, but they completely overlook the social and governance. And in fact, in Ireland, I think we overlook the social to a really detrimental extent. And we see this done really well in the UK. And I think this is one component that Ireland is falling very far behind on. And I'm not sure how we're going to catch up. But in terms of the contractors that you're talking to, whether they're your existing clients or potential would-be clients, how ready are they to meet those requirements?
They're all struggling. Even the biggest companies are struggling because it's very relatively easy to get your own house in order. If you're a main contractor, you can talk about what you do and your impact in the environment and your electric cars and all, you measure the energy that you're using on site. All those things are in your control. But again, when 80% of the action is in the supply chain, trying to get all that information from, and most projects, 50 or 60 different subcontractors and suppliers to give you all that information that you can then pass up the line to your clients and design team, that's where people are really, really going to struggle. And that wheel is starting to sort of turn. So some of the tier one main contractors we work with, we're very specifically talking to them about that because it comes down to, criteria, like what are the criteria you're setting? So the biggest challenge at the moment is what are the questions that need to be asked of the supply chain to determine whether they're, from an ESG perspective, they're tier one, tier two, or tier three. So deciding what those questions are is the first thing. But what we bring to it is that we can help companies ask those questions of the supply chain and to be able to evaluate those answers and to be able to rank and rate those answers. Because if you have a very, very high bar when it comes to ESG for a particular client, there's no point looking at 50 or 60 subcontractors. There's probably only 8 or 10 that actually are going to be able to achieve those requirements. And if you potentially price a job from somebody in the tier 3 ESG world, you're not going to be able to do it. So that's a big challenge. But it's getting all that information from the supply chain, which is obviously global and completely fragmented, and there's no end to the tail sometimes. And trying to get all that to surface all that information back up to be able to give a report to clients to say we're meeting these criteria. that'll have to be done in the next 6 to 12 months to meet the new CSRD requirements. But there's a long way to go at that. But we believe we're well placed to help companies like that, as are some of the partners we work with and a lot of the consultants out there.
And sometimes, Rob, and I appreciate it can be a frustration, but sometimes you can know the problems that are looming for a sector, but if they don't, even they might be aware of them, but if they don't recognize them as problems, if they don't recognize the gap that they're going to have to jump to get to the other side, then actually they're not likely to resource the problem. So just in terms of the companies that you're sitting down with, what are they seeing as the priorities kind of for the next 12 to 18 months, or where are they, what do they foresee as the challenges?
I mean, the biggest challenge for most companies is still the competition for subcontractors. I mean, every main contractor and developer area is competing for the same subcontractors. So competition for those companies is still a big factor. I suppose, again, just to stay on the point of ESG, that's probably the singular biggest challenge that's new to everybody is around ESG. And I suppose it's a very good point you make, because I think a lot of companies we talk to have only a high level awareness or very little awareness of the current regulations that were published in July of this year that will come into effect early next year. And so, there's a whole awareness piece, there's a whole education or knowledge piece there that seems to be missing at the moment. And there's lots of good consultants that we work with, and we're trying to sort of make people aware of this without kind of frightening people about it or scaremongering. But, but the interesting thing is that ultimately that the corporations are going to have to report on this. And actually, the requirements are bringing in the financial teams. It's all about the financial teams doing the reporting. So that's all going to come in. So as part of the financial reporting that any company has to do, the CSRD is going to be a critical part of that. So you just can't get away from that. The danger is that people are going to get caught out and they're not going to be able to issue those reports in a way that satisfy the requirements, which won't just have issues for them from a winning jobs point of view or satisfying clients. From a corporate and governance point of view, to go back to your point, they're not going to be able to meet those requirements. And as a company, if you can't meet your corporate and governance requirements, that's a whole world of pain that you don't want to be in.
Are you still speaking to contractors who aren't on track to do that?
I would say that the vast majority of contractors have a long way to go in relation to being able to satisfy that. I've no doubt that the bigger companies, are getting there, and the companies we know we're talking to, but they will get there in some shape or form because they will have to. But it's still a big challenge, and the supply chain is the really, really difficult bit. It's no longer going to be enough to say we, as our own corporation, are complying with all the ESG requirements. You can't. It'll be no longer, possible to say we promise you that our supply chain will do it when we bring them on board. You're going to have to prove that they're able to do it. You're going to have to prove it in advance of them coming on site, and that's going to be difficult because the challenge will be for the supply chain is that even in the UK and also in Ireland, the vast majority of subcontractors in Ireland, I think it's something like 90% of the companies who operate as subcontractors, both in Ireland and in the UK, have less than 20 people. And they don't have a big back of house staff to help them with all this. They struggle with the regular day-to-day compliance around insurances and health and safety. Like ESG is going to dwarf that. So those companies actually need to be given the solution. There's no point beating up the supply chain saying you have to give us this because they won't be able to give it. And then if they can't give it the information, they can't do the job. And if they can't do the job, well, there won't be enough people to do the work. So,
Rob, that's a really interesting stat. We actually are trying to do a body of work around SMEs involved in construction, and it's really difficult to pull that information together. So I hadn't come across the stat that that of the supply chain, the majority of those are made up of less than 20 people. Is that an Irish stat?
No, that's a lot of these stats are kind of colloquial and people publish different ways. But my own experience in talking to companies is that that's not far off the truth, because people sometimes looking in from the outside in think that you see all these big companies and they have thousands of employees, but all of that work is subcontracted out and subcontracted out. And people sometimes say to me, Rob, but the day that man in the van is gone, there's all these big sophisticated contractors with big flashy hoardings and all, and that's true. The contractors have become much more sophisticated, but they're still relying on the man in the van. And you might be four vans with 20 men, but that's still a small company that will struggle with things like ESG and everything else coming down the line at them.
That's a really good point. It's amazing that sometimes, particularly when we're looking at some of the larger projects and some of the really well-known brands now in construction, you kind of it's really important to keep front and center that actually the business of construction, while it has changed, it still comes down to managing risk and managing people. And that has always been at the core and remains at the core. So that's a really strong point to note. For anybody who is interested and wants to learn more, where can they find out more about Suppo and contact your team?
Yeah, so anybody can visit our website, suppo.io. Anybody can contact me on LinkedIn. I'm quite a regular on LinkedIn, and if anybody wants to direct message me on LinkedIn, they can, and or they can email me directly at rob.fox@suppo.io.
Super. Thank you very much. That was Rob Fox, CEO of Suppo. Our thanks to show producer Katie Talon and to the production team at Hear Me Roar Media. And thank you to Place Engage for making these conversations possible. And of course, thank you indeed for tuning in. We'll catch you on the next episode of Breaking Ground. In the meantime, please be sure to check out all of the other Irish and international real estate and construction shows on iProperty Radio.